All right, welcome everyone for this week's Rising Tide Foundation lecture. I'm very, very happy that we have once again the great Dr. Quan Le, who will be going through some extremely non-linear but very substantial ideas in the course of the coming hour or so, followed by, I'm sure, what will be a robust Q&A. The topics, as one has come to recognize, delivered by Dr. Le, are never what one would expect, and we always aspire at the Rising Tide Foundation for the celebration of ideas that bring about the best of human civilization, regardless of what part of the world or what time frame we find ourselves located in. There's always the question of, well, what is the good? What is it that makes human beings a species which is something to be celebrated, not something to be seen as sort of pollution machines that are viral or problem as our true nature, but rather something that is beautiful and the best of all possible resources, because we are the resource that creates resources, right? When we're in a healthy, creative state of love, of enthusiasm, of tuning our hearts and our minds at the same time to the beat of the universe, we solve problems. We're the creature that solves problems. We don't just adapt to limits. We don't just adapt to problems or make problems that are not necessarily even part of the universe. We do have free will, so we can choose to go outside of our orbit if we embrace folly. And sometimes folly has this peculiar quality of masquerading as wisdom. And then you got some really big problems. So looking at the history of civilization, and I don't just mean Western civilization, but looking at the history of all civilizations, we find the pursuit of wisdom as a topic and a theme of the best of Indian, of Chinese, of Russian, of European, you name it. You'll African cultures, you'll always find people at different stages in history grappling with this question of what is wisdom? What does it mean to be a human being living in a universe that has qualities that we share? And how do you express that? How do you create laws that are in accord with said universe? It's a big question, right? How do you balance the question of personal liberty and the desire for freedom that we all have, the desire for spontaneity, with the fact of laws of the universe? Laws, don't they necessarily inhibit your freedom to do whatever you want? Well, kind of, but in other ways, if it's a true law, it could actually make you more free by being obedient. So this whole duty freedom paradox, one realizes, is not as much of an unbridgeable paradox as we've often been told. It has solutions, but it requires a different way of thinking about it. And this is something which people like Confucius, Mencius, Socrates, Plato, the Platonists, Augustine, we find this all over the world, has been recognized and resolved in with different appearances, right? The image, the languages, the metaphors, the allegories, the songs, the artistic expression has been maybe different in how it has been resolved, but we find the same substance. So the fact that Dr. Le has been tuning his mind to this problem and its solutions for a very long time has just made him a wonderful gem. I'm going to include some of his previous presentations as well on Plato, Confucius, and others. But today we're going to go into something that deals with education and universal history and a lot more. So without saying anything more, Dr. Le, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Matthew. And thanks to everyone to come this afternoon to my presentation. So I just, as usual, would like to name the title of my presentation this afternoon: The Four Seeds, the Timeless Education and Universal History. I would say that human history can be viewed as a struggle, a fight between timeless education and the technical viewpoint or the technocratic viewpoint. And I would use Chinese history to illustrate that today, since we are talking of universal history. Universal history, of course, is human history, but it has, let's say, many places of struggle between the technocratic endeavor and the timeless education. So today I will focus more on the Chinese place, but that same struggle happened obviously in Europe, in North America, in Africa, in the Arabic speaking nations, and etc., of course. But my pretension is that the places and the specific anthropological manifestations of culture might differ, but the human soul is the same. So the timeless education is the same, even if we use different words. And for people having already listened to some of my talks, I have a love affair with Plato and Confucius. And once again, I will put them in honor this afternoon, or some of the disciples of Confucius, of Plato too, of course. I see them as in the same lineage. Okay, most of the time I start with theoretical stuff, but this time I will do something a bit different. I will start with practical stuff, with history. I would like to remind everyone that Chinese history can be roughly divided in four parts, I'm sorry. First, you have the Longshan culture. Longshan is written Longshan. That Longshan culture happened roughly between 3000 BCE to 2000 BCE. There were no written documents, but what I would call the basic elements of the Chinese matrix has been created during that millennium from 3000 BCE to 2000 BCE. That's the first part of Chinese culture, Chinese history. The second part is what we call the royal period. Okay, the royal period includes the three royal dynasties: the Xia dynasty, XIA, the Shangying dynasty, SHANG-YAN, and the Zhou dynasty, ZHOU. So the start of the Xia dynasty is 2070 BCE, and the end of the Zhou dynasty is 256 BCE. So it's a period of about 2000 years. The third part of the Chinese history is from the creation of the first Chinese empire in 221 BCE and the fall of that same imperial era in 1912, to be precise, February 12, 1912. So once again, it's a period of about 2 millennia. And the fourth period of Chinese history is from 1912, the creation of the first Chinese Republic. And we're still in that period because for me, the People's Republic of China is the continuation of the Republican era of the Chinese adventure under another form, obviously. I would say that the Republican era started only a century ago. However, for me, it's not the end result, but the present day results of that famous timeless struggle between the technocratic attitude and the timeless education. And in my title, you have the expression, the four seats, okay? And I think it would be a good idea before going into details at two specific moments of struggle in Chinese history that I would give a little bit of theory. The four seats has always been present in what is called the Ru Jia. Okay, Ru Jia is the Chinese expression or name for what is called in the West Confucianism. Okay, Confucianism, of course, comes from the fact that it was Confucius who was not the founder, but I would say the rejuvenator of the Ru Jia. Okay, because Ru Jia in Chinese means the school of the scholars. And that school of the scholars existed about 30 generations before Confucius. Okay, so Confucius was born in 551 BCE and he died in 479 BCE. So if we accept that a generation is about 30 years, wow, 30 generation is 900 years before Confucius, is let's say about 1,000 years before Confucius, starting with the Shangying dynasty, which started in 1600 BCE. So Confucius was an especially shining representative of that Ru Jia, of that school of the scholars, who rejuvenated that school, but he was not the creator of that school. Why do I say so? Because it's in my contention, my pretension to say that precisely Chinese history is a particular case of universal history, as European history, French history, American history is a particular case of universal history. And that universal history is precisely the struggle between the timeless education and the technocratic attitude and endeavor. Maybe another expression for technocratic endeavor would be the oligarchical endeavor. So I did not forget about the four seats. The four seats is the theoretical expression of something that has always been lived by the Chinese since times immemorial by Mencius, Mencius. Mencius is a disciple from the Rujia, the school of the scholars, and he was born in 372 BCE and he died in 289 BCE. That is the conscious statement of the Confucian school about the timeless education, okay? And that foundational, not hypothesis, that foundational thesis is that because we are born human, we necessarily have those four spiritual seeds in us. And those four spiritual seeds in us are commiseration, the capacity to feel sadness and to have a caring impulses towards someone suffering, the capacity to have a discernment between right and wrong, the capacity to have respect, and the capacity to have what I call metaphysical shame. Why do I take the effort to say metaphysical? Because we all know that there is a social shaming game, okay? When we say shame on you, it has always been a social play to control people. When the Confucian school speak of metaphysical shame, it's not about the shaming game as a control method used by the oligarchy for many centuries, but rather something that is natural in us, that we feel inadequate if we have some ugly behaviors, okay? And that is something, once again, that is natural in us according to the metaphysical thesis of the Confucian school. And if those four natural seeds that have been granted to us just because we were born human are nurtured, those forces transform themselves into the perfect or almost perfect version of them. Commiseration when nurture becomes humanity, respect when nurture becomes valor, and discernment when nurture becomes wisdom, and metaphysical shame when nurture becomes the inner sense of justice. And I would like to come back to the notion of respect becoming valor. It's not only about the dimension of respectful behavior towards other, okay? Because respect can also be called awe, or to be impressed in front of the landscape of the universe. So that kind of respect, that kind of valor can also bring us into the epistemological journey, okay? It's not only to be nice, to be kind with others, which is also something quite important, but that respect for the universe, the inner universe and the outer universe, will bring us to go beyond the first layer of understanding of reality, which is sense perceptions. And I will come back later on the epistemological steps that for those who have had the occasion to hear my talks, that I divide from 1 to 6. So once again, those seeds are the dynamic dimensions of our souls, okay? Because we don't manifest ourselves simply in the world in a passive manner, okay? Contrary to the animals which come to existence, who would fight for their survival, reproduce, and maintain that animal lineage, we human beings have a more active interaction with the universe, and that active interaction with the universe is possible because of the presence of those four seeds, which are would have to be developed more, of course, and I will come back with it later on. Now that I put the fundamental theoretical basis for my presentation, I would like to go to what I call paradoxically, once again, and to respect what I wanted to do today, I would not start with the golden triangle, okay? Because the golden triangle, when I qualify something as golden, it means that it applies for all mankind, okay? And when I call something silver, the silver triangle, for example, it applies for one specific civilization. And this afternoon, I will speak about the Chinese civilization. But if I talk about the American civilization or the French civilization, I would talk about the silver triangle for the American civilization or the French civilization too. So I will start with the practical case, so the silver triangle, and I would ask Matthew to go to the golden triangle afterwards as a generalization for all mankind. In the Confucian literature, you have what is called the five classics. I will come back to the detail of the five classics after, but I will focus on one of those five classics now, which is called the Chun Chu. Chun Chu, C-H-U-N, Chun Chu, Q-I-U. It means spring and autumn. And spring and autumn is an expression in ancient times in China, meaning history. That's all, okay? They take two seasons of the year to poetically or metaphorically represent history. So that classic at the very basic level is simply the historical chronicle of the Lu principality, Lu, L-U, Lu principality, which is a principality where Confucius was born, okay? So that chronicles covers from year 722 BCE to year 481 BCE. And the basic material of that chronicle is quite drab. So it's not that piece that is truly important. What is important is that the Confucian school developed philosophical, epistemological, and political considerations using that Chun Chu, which is that historical chronicle covering about 250 years of the Lu Principality, as the basic material to develop more theoretical and practical considerations. So we have three transmission of that Chun Chu. You have, I would call them X, Y, Z to help you to remember, because X, let's start with Z. One of the transmission is called the transmission of Mr. Zuo, that's his family name, Z-U-O, so that's the Z of XYZ. The other transmission is called the Gongyang, G-O-N-G-Y-A-N-G, because there's a Y in that, I would call the Y transmission. And the X transmission is from a Mr. called Guliang, G-U-L-I-A-N-G. Why do I attribute X to something that starts with a G? Because Mr. Guliang is the transmission that I would talk the less because it's very basic, okay? Mr. Guliang, he was more focusing on the family roles, okay? On the hierarchies inside the family, in the way that you interact with your friends, on the moral principles, which are very important, but it's less about universal history and it's more about universal history that I would like to focus today. Okay, and why X? Because a family is the product of the love act between a man and a woman. So X has always been the letter associated with X. So Mr. Guliang, speaking more of family roles, is given the letter X for you to remember more easily, okay? So when I would say X, it's about the interpretation of the Chun Chu more focused on the family and the social interaction. And when I speak of the Y version, is about more the Gongyang, which is more the interpretation seeing Confucius as the philosopher king, which is more pertinent, relevant for universal history. And the Z interpretation by Mr. Zuo is more about, let's say, geopolitics, okay? Because in the Z interpretation, you have many descriptions of diplomacy, of battles, of interaction between principalities, and even about great merchants, very wealthy great merchants, almost plutocrats, if we use words used nowadays, that were in interactions with the princely court and with the philosophers of the time. So I would like to start with the Y version, the Konyang version, because that is the most important version in terms of his universal history. Because in that version, as always, something that is superior will cover everything about the lower or the lesser versions, okay? Because the Kongyang version, the version treating of universal history will state very clearly that Confucius is not only a teacher giving lessons to young noble, okay? Because in his very down-to-earth role in society in his time 25 centuries ago, Confucius was born in the lower nobility, and that lower nobility is called Shi, S-H-I. Maybe an equivalent in English would be the gentry, but it's always difficult to have a exact translation when two cultures is separated by 25 centuries, okay? But a kind of gentry compared to the upper nobility. So most of the time, the gentry would serve in the army as officers or as civil servants, and one of their role is precisely to be teachers of the young nobleman, to teach them the right manner to behave themselves at court, to know the poems, the histories of their principalities and the principalities of the Chinese world, and to be proper aristocrat for their time, if I may say so. But that is the down-to-earth comprehension, understanding of Confucius. Confucius in the Kongyang version or the Y version is explained as the philosopher king, okay, as the person having the moral quality, the moral excellence, the mental power to be at the head of a republic. But when I say a republic, I don't mean the particular regime that we understand nowadays, but in the etymological understanding, meaning being the leader of a structure striving for the common good, okay? Because that's the meaning of the republic, res in Latin, publica, the common thing or the common good. So in the rest of my presentation, and as usual when I speak, when I say of a republic, I don't mean a specific political regime, but I mean the common good. And the political regime has less importance as long as the people in the leadership of that government are the best, okay? The aristocrats, according to Plato. So the Kongyang Zhuang, okay? Zhuang, Z-H-U-A-N, mean transmission, okay? The Kongyang Zhuang, or the Y version, argues that human society evolves over time and could be divided into three phases. The first stage is marked by political chaos and social enemy, okay, absence of law. The second stage is characterized by the re-establishment of legitimate political order. And the third stage is when the world as a whole experiences great harmony and every individual is able to fulfill and realize their potential. So when we reach to that utopia, okay, I think we can say that it's utopia, which is the end point of universal history, and the Chinese have a word for that. When you have the second stage, which is the re-establishment of legitimate political order, is called Xiao Kang, X-I-A-O, Kang, K-A-N-G, small prosperity, okay, That's the second stage. And the third stage, the accomplishment or the achievement of universal history, is called Da Tong, meaning great harmony. DATONG, Da Tong. And what are the characteristics of those Da Tong? So there's unity of cosmological and political order. Okay, so what do they mean by unity of cosmological and political order? I borrow a little bit from those Chinese theories when I talk about the fact that the end goal of universal history is to match the epistemological stature of the leadership with their social status. Okay, that when you say an aristocrat, it's not only someone who has been born in a given family in a close oligarchy, but you truly means that he's part of the best of mankind. Okay, so the Y version, the Kongyang version, would use the expression unity of cosmological and political order, and that I translated a little bit in modern words by saying that there's a perfect match between the epistemological stature and the social status of the leadership, meaning that the oligarchy is an open oligarchy, not a closed oligarchy. A closed oligarchy is a plutocracy, and an open oligarchy is a true aristocratic oligarchy or an aristocracy. Second, in the Kongyang transmission, the Y version, there is a reconciliation between past and present sources of political legitimacy, meaning that reconciliation between past and present, meaning that because the Chinese have, okay, now I have to make a parenthesis. Some culture will project into the past the utopia, okay? And the Chinese culture is one of the culture that would project in the past, okay? In the past, we have perfection, and now because we are not epistemologically evolved, we fall from that epistemological high, and we must strive to go back to that epistemological height, okay? That's the mentality of Chinese culture, respecting the past. For Western culture, which is a type of culture that would project the perfection into the future, okay? We are now in a state of moral degeneracy, and we must strive to work on our epistemological levels to create into the future the perfect society, okay? And I would say that it's only cultural differences, because at the deepest, it doesn't matter, okay? Because what is important is to work in the present on our insufficient epistemological development, and necessarily we will have a better society in the future. So here it's a small difference of mentality, that's all. The third point is limitation on monarchical power, okay? Because once again, maybe here it reflects a little bit more the Chinese mentality too. For China, the government always have at its top a kind of monarch, okay? Even in the true republican and aristocratic meaning of the government, okay? Even when you have a true aristocrats as leaders, for the Chinese, there's always a kind of monarch, okay? Even now with the Red Dynasty in Beijing, I'm not shocked when the Western big lie propaganda machine called President Xi an emperor, because with my Chinese mentality, it's not an insult, okay? It's not an offense, okay? Because for me, in a government, even ruled by true aristocrats, there is also always a monarch, okay? The one who is at the top. And at the another point that is very interesting, that already 25 centuries ago, the Chinese theorists were talking about the distinction between legitimate political maneuver and realpolitik. Okay, so at the time when I said that one of the three versions, the Z version of Mr. Zuo, Z-U-O, in that version, they were talking a lot about realpolitik, okay? Battles, diplomacy, shenanigans with great merchants, the plutocrats of the time, manipulations of the people, etc. Another point is interaction between human and heaven. And interaction between human and heaven is much more about the four seats that I were talking 10 minutes ago. Distinction between Chinese and non-Chinese cultures, okay? So at the time already, even if the Chinese, I have to admit, has a certain Sinocentric attitude, they were perfectly capable 25 centuries ago to distinguish that they are culture who were not Chinese, even if admittedly, they always has a kind of Sinocentric attitude, that's for sure. And those are the theoretical point that has been put forward in that Y version, the Kongyang version, where it has been perfectly theorized that famous or infamous, as you will, struggle or battle, cosmic battle between the oligarchical endeavor and universal history, okay? Or if you want, the striving towards the ultimate epistemological development, which will be translated in the political regime, which is the best, meaning aristocracy in the true sense of the word. Now, maybe a little bit of a historical consideration. Mr. Zor, the version who is more focused on geopolitical battles, plutocrats, and manipulation of people, is a guy who lived at the same time than Confucius. Okay, so I remind that Confucius was born in 551 BCE, and he died in 479 BCE. The other two versions, the X and the Y version, the Kuliang and the Kongyang version, have been created by disciples of Zixia. Zixia, Zixia, is a direct disciple of Confucius. Zixia was born in 507 BCE, and he died in 400 BCE. So he had a very long life. Okay, he died at 107 years old. And when Confucius died in 479 BCE, he was a young man of 28 years old. And he was a kind of what in Chinese is called a shen tong, meaning a genius, okay? Because apparently, if we trust tradition, when he was 7 or 8 years old, he was speaking of philosophy and poetry with Confucius, and Confucius was absolutely delighted with him. So I am not surprised that he was at the origin of the two interpretations of Kuliang and Kongyang, especially Kongyang, which is the big interpretation of universal history. And of course, Mr. Kuliang and Mr. Kongyang were the disciple of Zixia. Okay, Zixia is his aristocratic name. Okay, Zi means master. If you read the Analects, you will find that many characters in that book have the Zi, Z-I, because they were of the upper nobility or of the gentry. And his name is Pu Shang, B-U, which is a family name, and Shang, S-A-A-S-H-A-N-G, his given name. But I would keep on saying Zixia, which is his official name in the Confucian world. What now? I would like to say that now I would like to. I will keep on with the Kongyang school, but not from a theoretical standpoint. Okay, the Kongyang school was very influential under the Han Dynasty, and that's why I'm speaking of that. And thanks God, the Kongyang school was important during the Han Dynasty. Why? Because the Kongyang school had a higher epistemological level than the other two schools, okay? And the Han Dynasty is the second imperial dynasty, but I would say the first important one, because the Qin dynasty, Q-I-N, and Qin, from Qin, we have China, okay? Because in Sanskrit, Qin, it China, C-I-N-A, from the Indians. And when the Westerner came to India, they learned that the Indian name for China is China, so China became China. So that Qin dynasty created the first Chinese empire in 221 BCE, but it was a short-lived dynasty. It collapsed in 206 BCE, so only 15 years of duration. And the dynasty following the Qin dynasty is precisely the 400 years long Han dynasty. And that Han dynasty, once again, thanks God, has been more influenced by the Gongyang version of the Chun Chu, because from the start, imperial Chinese history has been under the aegis or the influence of a more universal or more cosmic standpoint about history rather than realpolitik or family stuff, even if the family stuff and the realpolitik have their own importance, obviously. And now I would like to say that from 361 BCE to 221 BCE, during those 140 years, the Qin Principality were striving with great efforts and relentlessly for the creation of the Chinese Empire. And they succeeded in 221 BCE. So the Chinese Empire has been something that has been reflected upon. The Zhou dynasty, the royal house of the Ji, ruled between 1045 BCE to 770 BCE, so almost 3 centuries. But they lost the western capital city in 770 BCE, and they kept on their rule in the eastern capital city from 770 BCE to their collapse in 256 BCE. But in that second part of their rule, they were not truly kings, okay? They were only political arbiters, control models, and I would say religious figures, because only the Zhou king at the time was the son of heaven. Why I'm speaking of those 5 centuries of not of disorder, but of lack of royal leadership, because it's during those 5 centuries that you have a lot of political and philosophical endeavor in China, and that justify what I said, that the Chinese Empire, which manifests itself in 221 BCE, was not the product of non-thinking, okay, of fate or destiny. It was the product of relentless political thinkers, and combined with many noble houses. But the most successful of those noble houses was the Ying noble houses, Y-I-N-G, and that Ying noble house, is the creator of the Qin dynasty. The Qin dynasty being the one creating the first Chinese empire. But because they were a bit too ruthless during their rule of 15 years, they have been replaced in 206 by the Han dynasty. And the Han dynasty, for the first 3 generations, were ruling with a mix of Taoist political philosophy of laissez-faire, that they call Wu Wei, W-U-W-E-I, okay, Wu Wei here in the political meaning. It's not the philosophical meaning, okay? Wu Wei is a very down-to-earth political concept, meaning simply that the state would not intervene in the life of the population, that they would let the local lords manage the local population, and as long as the local lords would give homage or tribute to the imperial court. But in 136 BCE, the young 15 years old Emperor Wu, who came to power in 141 BCE and who would die in 87 BCE, so he had a very long reign of 54 years, will promote Confucianism, and he will adopt Confucianism as state ideology and philosophical tenets for the empire in 136 BCE. And I would go as far as to say that that choice of Emperor Wu of the Han Dynasty of Confucianism in 136 BCE is as momentous as the choice of Christianity by Emperor Constantine for the Western world in 313 BC AD, I'm sorry, with the Edict of Milan. And later on, by in 381, I think AD, when Emperor Theodosius chose Christianity as the only official religion of the Roman Empire. So I would make the rapprochement between the choice by Emperor Wu in 136 BCE to the choice by Emperor Theodosius in 381 AD. With Christianity as the only religion of the Roman Empire. Why I'm speaking of this now is that a little bit late, Emperor Wu, as I said, died in 81 BCE, but I would like to talk a little bit about him before talking about his 2 or 3 successors. As I said, he took the throne at 15 years old in 141 BCE. He was the guy who sent Zhang Qian, Z-H-A-N-G, Q-I-A-N, to Central Asia. Okay, he was the sovereign, the Chinese sovereign, who opened the first Silk Road, expanding the Chinese empire almost by 30%. Okay, because when he inherited the empire from his father, the Chinese empire was about 3.5 million square kilometers, okay, more or less. And at the end of his reign, the Chinese empire would expand to 5 million square kilometers. And it would be more or less the size of the Chinese empire, 5 million square kilometers, till the 18th century, okay? And at the 18th century, the Chinese empire would double another time and would reach 12 to 13 million square kilometers. And because of the problems that China had during the 19th century, China lost about 2 million square kilometers. And now China is at 10 million square kilometers. So at the time, then he opened the Silk Road. During his time, commerce was developed at an extraordinary level. I think it's not far-fetched to talk about plutocrats for that time, okay? Because some of the salt merchant and the iron merchant had revenues equivalent to the taxation of the imperial court, meaning the annual revenues of the imperial court for the taxation of the whole empire. Okay, so you have merchants who were rival of the emperor in terms of wealth, if not more. So there was the creation of a class of plutocrats, and what I'm speaking about those plutocrats because we will have to discuss about them a little bit later. During that time too, why the Chinese empire expanded by 30%? It's because you had the famous Xiongnu, Xiongnu, which were the nomadic people north of China, that the European would call the Huns, okay, the famous or infamous Huns, Huns, which will run amok within the Roman Empire 4 or 5 centuries later, in the 3rd and 4th century AD. Well, they were already running amok in China 5 centuries before under the name of Xiongnu. And because Emperor Wu had to deal with them, he had to fight them and ultimately to conquer them in 119 BCE. And that's why the Chinese Empire had a corridor to Central Asia, opening thus the first Silk Road and expanding the land of the empire by 30% to 5 million square kilometers in one generation. So, and he made a lot of internal reform in terms of taxation collections and of the administration, needless to say, and bringing down also the power of his cousins, the true oligarchy at the moment, meaning the high aristocracy, which at the time participated quite a lot to the imperial government, because a system of meritocracy, which will appear later in Chinese history, was not yet in operation in between 141 BCE and 87 BCE. Okay, now I would like to talk about what happened not under Emperor Wu, but under one of his successor, Emperor Zhao, Z-H-A-O. Emperor Wu, as I said, died in 87 BCE. His son, Emperor Zhao, was still quite young, and they had a region, and that region is called Huoguang, Huoguang, H-U-O, Guang, G-U-A-N-G. Let's go back to the fact that I said that the empire expanded by 30% in one generation. I think that you're all quite bright enough to understand that that expansion has been done with a lot of effort from the Chinese people. Because the taxation increased, because the army needed money, needed horses, needed provisions, and so on. So Emperor Wu, when he died in 87 BCE, his legacy was impressive, but the death also was impressive. Okay, so the region Huoguang had to bring in some revenue. And there was a talk in 81 BCE at the imperial court to see what would be the good policies to keep on, if you want. And why I'm speaking of that Yan Tie Lun, is because the debates on salt and iron in English in 81 BCE is because the universal school of the Chun Chu, the Gongyang school, the white version, play an important role in that debate. Let's go back to the background, okay? So the discourses on salt and iron took place behind a tumultuous background. The previous ruler, Emperor Wu of Han, had undertaken a drastic change in policy compared to his predecessors, reversing their laissez-faire policies at home and policy of appeasement of the Xiongnu abroad. He nationalized coinage, salt, and iron in order to pay for his massive campaigns against the Xiongnu Confederacy, which posed a threat to the Chinese Empire and a limitation to its expansion. Although Emperor Wu was successful in his campaigns, his policies bankrupted many merchants and industrialists, led to widespread dissatisfaction and even revolts against imperial authority. After his death, the regent Huoguang called a court conference to discuss whether to continue Wu's policies. So the policies in the early Han were marked by laissez-faire principles due to the adoption by the early emperors of the Taoist principles of Wu Wei that I talked 10 minutes ago. So Wu Wei, W-U-W-E-I, literally meaning do nothing. Okay, so no intervention from the state. And here, that is the epistemological standpoint, okay? Because laissez-faire might sound quite cool, okay? But laissez-faire most of the time means we let the oligarchy do whatever they want and they can exploit the people. Okay, that is the true meaning of laissez-faire if you think a little bit. As part of their laissez-faire policy, agricultural taxes were reduced from 1/15 of agricultural output, okay, meaning let more money to the aristocrat, the landowners, okay, because aristocrat for me is a epistemological development, so I would use landowner instead, okay. So it let more money for the landowners, and for a brief period abolished entirely. So of course the landowners were very happy. In addition, the labor corvée required of peasants was reduced from 1 month every year to 1 month every 3 years. The mining of coins was privatized. Okay, coining of coins privatized. It reminds a little bit of something happening now, or maybe 2 centuries ago in the West. And one-chin taxes on salt and other commodities were removed. Later opponents of taxation described the early Han as a prosperous period and lamented that they saw what they saw as overtaxation. Under Emperor Jing, which is Jing is the name, is the father of Emperor Wu, the ropes used to hang the bags of coins were breaking apart due to the weight, and bags of grain, which had been stored for several years, were rotting because they had been neglected and not eaten. Okay, so that's part of the propaganda at the time of the plutocrats and of the oligarchy to say that it's better the laissez-faire. Okay, but once again, laissez-faire is tantamount to leave the oligarchy run amok. And so merchant industrialists in particular prospered during that period, of course, that I would say equivalent to the bourgeois oligarchy. In the early Western Han, the wealthiest men in the empire were the merchants who produced and distributed salt and iron, acquiring wealth that rival the annual tax revenues collected by the imperial court. Okay, so we can call them plutocrats. These merchants invested in land, becoming great landowners and employing large number of peasants. A salt or iron industrialist could employ over 1,000 peasants to extract either liquid brine, sea salt, rock salt, or iron ore. So when Emperor Wu of Han viewed such large-scale private industry as a threat to the state, as they drew the peasants' loyalties away from farming and towards the industrialists, nationalizing the salt and iron trades eliminated this threat and produced large profit for the state. And of course, the money from the states was for the war, but also for the education. Let's not forget that, okay? Because if we understand that laissez-faire is equivalent to let the oligarchy run amok, state intervention when it's run by true aristocrats mean also an improvement in the life of the average Chinese peasants at the time. The policy was successful in financing Emperor Wu's campaign of challenging the nomadic Xiongnu Confederation, of course, as I said, while colonizing the Hersey Corridor. The Hersey Corridor is equivalent to the Gansu province nowadays. Gansu is written Gansu, and what is now Xinjiang of Central Asia. Okay, so the Chinese took what is called Xinjiang nowadays 21 centuries ago. Northern Vietnam, Yunnan, and North Korea. Other policies included a price stabilization scheme and a tax of 10% on the capital of merchants. Of course, they were not very happy that there's a tax of 10% on their capital. And industrialists who had not yet been expropriated. However, those policies impose great hardships still on the people, because even if the imperial court tried to compensate, you understand that the local oligarchy would take a revenge on the peasant, and it's not always easy for the court to check them, because of the war situation against the Xiongnu Confederation. So there were banditry and armed revolts that were occurring by Emperor Wu's death, once again in 87 BCE. Okay, so that's why we have that famous debate 6 years after his death in 81 BCE, who has been called by his regent, His Excellency He Guang. And since his son was even not a teenager at the time. As complaints surfaced criticizing more and more about the government policies, the regent He Guang, who was de facto ruler of China after Emperor Wu of Han, called a court conference to debate whether the policies of Emperor Wu should be continued, and the resulting debate was divided into two groups, the reformers and the modernists. The reformers, largely provincial Confucian scholars, backed small privatization, okay? And here the key word is small, okay? Back small privatization and a return to the policies of old, more center on morality, if you want, okay? But here you have to be very careful because the three Confucian schools don't have exactly the same standpoint. And I want to put on the forefront the Y version, okay, the Gongyang version, which is the version on universal history. The modernists, on the other hand, largely represented the interests of the central government and were more in tune with legalist philosophy. But here, be careful. Legalist philosophy only as a tool, because those modernists, in terms of principles, were Confucian of the Gongyang school, of the Y school, okay, of the school focusing in universal history, okay? And when I say universal history, I mean the people believing that we have to strive to give a classical education to as many people as possible, and that ultimately that classical education will produce true aristocrats, and those true aristocrats will manage to strive that the epistemological stature would match with the social status, okay? So here, I would like to make a parenthesis about legalism. We cannot, from the principle, from the philosophical standpoint, we can make a separation between legalism and Confucianism. I agree, okay? Confucianism is more on the epistemological development, and legalism is more on the framework of the state, okay? The structure of the state, of the oligarchy. However, Confucian scholars always use the legalist framework, but they manage to fine-tune that legalist framework according to Confucian universal history principles. And here that is the big thing, because the modernists, they were using the legalist framework as a tool, but they were Confucian of the Y version, of the Gongyang version, of the universal history version. Okay, so I go back to what I said. The reformers' view was based on the I would say, smaller Confucian ideal, which sought to bring about the betterment of man by conformity to fundamental moral principles. And I have nothing against that, but I would explain why I say smaller Confucian ideal. To achieve this, they wish to reduce controls, demands for service, and taxation to a minimum. The reformers' criticism of the monopolies largely center on the idea that the state should not compete with the people for profit, as it would tend to oppress the citizenry while doing so. Mercantile venture were not proper activities for the state. They pointed out that the monopolies had placed an immense burden on the citizenry, and in addition, the reformers complained that the state monopolies oppressed the people by producing low quality and impractical tools that were useless and made only to meet quotas, yet which the peasant had to pay for regardless of their quality. The reformers believed the former private smelting by small-scale family enterprises made better implements because of pride of workmanship and because they were closer to the users. In contrast to state monopoly, in addition, the reformers complained that the state monopolies could not coordinate their production in accordance to the needs of all the provinces of the empire, with some areas overproducing and actually forcing the peasants to buy the surplus. The reformers also criticized the aggressive foreign policy of Emperor Wu, which they believe had weakened instead of strengthening China, and whose cost did not justify the benefits involved. Okay, so I'm perfectly aware that there are plenty of argumentation, and but I want to repeat again. Okay, it's not black and white. It's gray. Okay, it's there's many layers of gray. And now I would like to give the modernist position. Okay, and that modernist position, once again, I repeat myself, they use the legalist framework, but it's operated from above by universal history Confucian epistemology. So the reformist position, the modernist position. Okay, the modernists were headed by Sang Hongyang, Sang S-A-N-G, that's his family name, Hongyang, Hongyang. He was one of the plutocrats who had been selected by Emperor Wu to administer to his new interventionist policies. Okay, because what is better than to control the plutocrat than to name them at posts of responsibilities where you can check them at the same time when you have a true government with true power, of course. And they justify, and I would like to name the modern case of Jack Ma. Okay, Jack Ma is a modern Chinese plutocrat, and he has been used by the Chinese government for certain things. But when he had the pretensions to be above the state, he has been given a lesson that he's not above the state. So the position of Emperor Wu of Han towards the plutocrats of his time and of Sang Hongyang is exactly the same. So they justify, so the modernists justify the imposition of controls on the grounds that they would thus wrest profits from wealthy private merchants that could pose a threat to the state and bring them into state coffers. Particularly, modernists claim that salt and iron industrialists were brutal and tyrannical, who employed thousands of workers that could potentially become rebels. The modernists took the view that with its iron monopoly, the state could effectively distribute tools of good quality for the use of the peasant, as well as stabilizing the price of many essential goods. They also claimed that private workshop was too small, unspecialized, and poorly equipped. Modernists claim that the government workshop offer better working conditions and access to more materials than private workshops. Okay, so you see that the argumentation are good on the reformer side as on the modernist side. In addition, the modernists claim that the expansionist campaigns were necessary to defend China from barbarians' incursions, and that by nationalizing the salt and iron industries, the state could obtain the funds needed to defend the empire without imposing additional burdens on the peasantry. Okay, so here you can see that it's not white and black. Okay, it's many layers of gray. So the legacy is that the modernists survived this debate with most of their policies intact, with only the monopoly on alcohol, on liquors abolished. So La Société des Alcools du Québec was not the first state monopoly on alcohol, although Sang Hongyang, the plutocrat, was later executed in 80 BCE for treason. Well, you know, plutocrats has a very sad proclivity to treason, I would say. So reformers gradually gain more power through the rest of former Han due to the growing unsustainability of the modernist policies. They briefly succeeded in getting the central government monopolies on salt and iron abolished from 44 to 41 BCE, so only for 3 years. Though this was unsuccessful and the monopolies resumed until the end of the first half of the Han Empire. And after his overthrow, the government of later Han resumed earlier laissez-faire policies that, in my understanding, is one of the explanation why the Han Empire collapsed in 220 AD and relinquished control of these industry to private businessmen. Okay, so once again, there's nothing black and white. Okay, what I mean is that the state has an educational role. Okay, of course that we should promote private enterprise and so on, but if the state just move back and don't maintain at least an educational role and a supervisory role, you wouldn't let the plutocrats come back and run amok. And when the plutocrat run amok, it would be the end of the state in 1, 2, 3 generations. And it's what happened to the Han. In my understanding, and in the understanding of many Chinese historians, philosophers, and geopolitical analysts too. And that is the good moment, I think, that I would ask Matt to make appear the axial epistemological triangle, because what I talked about during the last 20 minutes is about the silver triangle. Now I would like to talk about the golden triangle, about the axial epistemological triangle. So Matt made appear the first image, and that is the axial epistemological triangle. Okay, so axial is for axiology, and axiology is the fancy word for ethics. Okay, the reflection on the good, on the beautiful, and on the true. Okay, that's why you see at the center of the triangle a circle with beauty, goodness, and truth, which are the 3 universal timeless forms at the base of the universe, which is the weft of the universe. Okay, and on the outside of the circle you have the developed 4 seeds. Okay, I said that we have 4 natural seeds just because we are born human, and those 4 natural seeds are commiseration, discernment between right and wrong, respect, and metaphysical shame. And when those seeds are nurtured, they become respectively humanity, wisdom, valor, and justice. And those cardinal virtues, those 4 cardinal virtues, are manifest the active mode of beauty, goodness, and truth. Okay, the active mode of beauty is justice. The active mode of goodness is valor and humanity, and the active mode of truth, of course, is wisdom. So axial epistemological triangle. I just talked about the axiological dimension, which is the timeless dimension. And the epistemol is precisely the channel between the timeless dimension, the divine dimension, and the phenomenal dimension, which is the political dimension. Okay, so the epistemological dimension is on the 3 corners of the triangle, the top corner being theory of knowledge. Okay, and here I'm talking about Plato and Confucius. In the theory of knowledge of both of Confucius and of Plato, they were talking precisely of the eternal and timeless and universal form of beauty, goodness, and truth, that in Chinese is called Yi, Ran, and Tao. Those 3 forms have to be recognized, acknowledged within ourselves by what is called the timeless education. Okay, the timeless education, educare, to bring forth what is within, because that what is within is precisely the four seeds and the three universal forms. And that classical education will bring forth into the political dimension that reality, and that journey is the epistemological journey. Okay, and that epistemological journey is first to be informed about that theory of knowledge, and that theory of knowledge has two consequences: heuristics and hermeneutics, which are the two words on the two corners of the triangle. Heuristics is the way to creativity. Okay, it's the dialogue, the playful exploration of how we can discover the universal principles or the laws of nature inside us and outside us. And hermeneutics is the art of giving a meaning to our human life. Okay, as the Indian poet Rabindranath Tagore said, uh, the real is the call, the human meaning, okay, is created because there is a call from the real. And the human endeavor to give a meaning to the reality of the world, if we want to go above the sense of perceptions, is precisely the combined uh, striving of heuristic and hermeneutics, which are simply two fancy words, and I like to use fancy words, as you know, uh, to, the two ways, the two practical ways to go to put into real practice the theory of knowledge, so that that epistemological adventure, journey, development when put into contact the axiological dimension of truth, goodness, beauty, justice, wisdom, valor, and humanity with the reality of the political dimension. Okay, Matt, can you give the other image, please? Okay, so here we have six lines. We have six lines representing precisely the Confucian statement about what Plato said. Okay, you have six lines because those six lines represent the hexagram, which is the Chinese way to talk about, which is the Chinese equivalent of chapter 7 or book 7 of the Republic, written by Plato. Let's not forget that Plato and Confucius gave as foundational thesis that your epistemological development will correspond to a certain political attitude. Okay, so you see two group of three lines: the lower group and the upper group. The lower group is the lower trigram, and the upper group is the upper trigram. The lower group is also known as the animal kingdom, okay, where the epistemology is about first line is sense of perception, line 2 is about the intellect, meaning words and concept, and line 3 is about the opinions of so-called experts. Okay, politically they are the so-called experts relying on mathematical form as the supreme, are called fake democratic man. Okay, that's line 3 in the political kingdom or dimension. And line 2 in the political dimension is called the plutocratic man, meaning the man motivated by wealth, power, and profits, a little bit like the plutocrats during the reign of Emperor Wu of Han. And the first line corresponding to sense and perception as epistemological tool is the kingdom or the dimension of the democratic man, man motivated by senses perception, tribal affinities, lex talionis meaning eye for eye, tooth for tooth, and hedonism. Okay, so you can control very easily that kind of man, politically speaking, by bread and circuses. And it has always been the instruments of plutocrat, bread and circuses, to control the democratic man, and that is the animal kingdom. And once again, why the democratic man insists the fake democratic man, okay, the fake one, because the other one is also called democratic, but the true one, Timocratic. The fake democratic man, why they insist so much on the fact that mathematical forms is the supreme, because if mathematical forms is the supreme, it means that the three universal and timeless forms of beauty, goodness, and truth simply don't exist. Okay, so if they don't exist, it means that the plutocrats and the fake democratic man are the rulers of this world. That's why they absolutely want for the mathematical forms to be the supreme. And as all of you know, that's why Bertrand Russell, a fake democratic man, and Whitehead, another fake democratic man, tried by publishing in 1910, 1912, and 1913 a book called Principia Mathematica, okay, because they wanted to enshrine into a kind of absolute statement of principles that mathematical forms are the supreme. And if they succeeded in their endeavor, it means that the plutocrats and the fake democratic man wouldn't be the rulers of this world forever. But of course, since that endeavor was not rooted in reality, they failed. And we still have in our heart, in our mind, that the supreme is not mathematical forms, but rather beauty, goodness, and truth. And beauty, goodness, and truth are the three lines of the upper three lines, okay? The fourth line is beauty, the fifth line is goodness, and the sixth line is truth, corresponding, politically speaking, to the true democratic man motivated by justice, contrary to the fake democratic man motivated by the appearance of justice. So that's the difference between 3 and 4. So if you're not very careful, you might mix a fake one for the true one, etc. And the fifth line corresponds to the aristocratic man, meaning a man motivated by playful exploration, creativity, inventivity, and discovery. And we can give an example Kepler, Leibniz, the Cardinal of Cusa, Plato, Confucius, etc. But Plato, Confucius, I would put them at the sixth line, being philosopher kings, because that's the level of truth of philosopher kings, motivated precisely of creating aristocratic man and true democratic man, which are the people having the right to rule. Matthew, can I have the next image, please? Okay.
Or do you want another image?
Okay, those are the two images. Okay.
We also have this one.
Okay, perfect. So I think that in terms of words, I gave everything I wanted to say about that golden triangle. You're right. Okay, so what I wanted to complete with it, oh, yes. The political dimension, when the inner triangle brought, meaning when the epistemological journey brought you to beauty, goodness, and truth, and the active form, wisdom, valor, justice, and humanity. What is outside that I call MCMD and ME is almost spontaneous. Okay, MC means the mythology and the conversation. Okay, the mythology and the conversation is about the psyops, the narrative, the storytelling. Okay, but when you have a good insight, when you have the circle activated because of a right epistemological journey, the narrative, the storytelling, the psyops, they are not called psyops, narratives, and storytelling. They are called education. Okay, a good educational program. And the MD means models and diplomacy. Okay, and when you have the inner circle activated, it's not called diplomacy. It's simply called human relations. Okay, you will treat people in a fair way and in a respectful way. Okay, there is no need for complex diplomacy. And the ME means military and economy. I'm not against having an army or a navy, but the army and the navy would be used to protect people and not to bully weaker nations. So it would be the difference, and the economy would be something real, based on the needs of the people and not on a fantastic oligarchical financial imagine economy. For at least, I would use the expression democracy for the plutocrats and tyranny for the people, more or less, when you don't have a true economy. Okay, so that would be on the golden triangle, and that golden triangle can be used for any culture. Okay, when I was speaking of the Chun Chu and of the three interpretation of the Chun Chu, the XYZ versions, I call that the silver triangle, because it's about one specific civilization. Okay, but the golden triangle is about all possible civilization. And since I am speaking of the Chinese civilization today, I want to talk about the silver square, okay? Because when I was speaking of the four seeds and the transformation of the four seeds into wisdom, humanity, valor, and justice, of course, it is appropriate for all mankind, so that is the golden square. But now I would like to talk about the silver square.
Do I have an image of that or no?
No, you don't have an image of that, but there's no need, because it's simple to visualize a square.
Okay.
So, that silver square is about the books used in Chinese civilization to develop the four seeds into wisdom, humanity, valor, and justice. So you have a square, so you have four corners. On the left upper side corner, you have the five classics. On the left lower corner, you have the four books. On the right upper corner, you have what is called the Huang Lao doctrine. Okay, Huang, Huang dash Lao, Lao, Huang Lao doctrine. And on the lower right corner, you have the legalist philosophers. Okay, because I want to mention them. I cannot exclude them because they are part of Chinese civilization as long as those legalist frameworks are used as a tool under the supervision of Confucian gentlemen. The five classics are the Book of Songs. I wouldn't give the name in English, okay? Because if you are interested, you can go on the internet and you write Chinese classic, the Book of Songs, and you will have detail. So the Book of Songs, which is the book of poetry, the book of documents, which are written documents about the royal period of the Xia Shang Zhou dynasty. The Chun Chu, okay, the spring and autumn, meaning the historical chronicle of the Lu Principality between 722 and 481. But as I said, it's a quite draft document, okay? It's not that basic document, it's the important stuff. The important stuff are the three epistemological interpretation, the XYZ version that I took 20 minutes to talk to you. After that, you have the book on rituals, and the last one is the Yi Ching, of course, the book of change. Okay, and that book of change is about what I showed 10 minutes ago about the hexagram with the lower trigram and the upper trigram. The Huang Lao is a set of very complex authors which focus more on the political dimension and not the Taoist version that most Westerners have a vague idea, okay? Because when we say Taoist in the West, you see people practicing Tai Chi and with the Chi and so on, okay? When I speak about Taoists here in the political dimension, it's not at all that stuff that I'm speaking about. I just want to give some names, okay? Because it's a vast subject, okay? So I don't have the pretension to cover that in 5 minutes, okay? So there's an author called the Zhuangzi, Zhuangzi, from the 4th century BCE, who is very important for that Taoist school. There's another one called the Huainanzi, Huainanzi, who is a member of the Han Imperial House, called Liu An, Liuan, who wrote about a book on epistemology and political development. And that is the Huainanzi. You have the Chun Chu Fan Lu, Chunqiufan from a very important Gongyang school philosopher from the 2nd century BCE called Dong Zhongshu, Dongzhongshu. And there are many others, but I think that I wouldn't stop here for that school because it would be, I would say, another presentation, because I just want to give you a general representation by that silver square of the 4 groups of important philosophical school having their impact on Chinese civilization. And that Han Dynasty is very important because the Chinese are still under the control legacy of that Han Dynasty. And that Han Dynasty having ruled 400 centuries between 206 BCE and 220 AD was received the direct legacy from the old classical Chinese age, okay? And that old classical Chinese age is the creation of the Zhou dynasty, okay? The Zhou dynasty, once again, truly ruled from 1045 BCE to 770 BCE, and from 1770 BCE to 256 BCE. They were control models, religious leaders, but not kings, not really kings, but rather political arbiters. So you have that period of the Zhou creation, with Confucius was a paramount exemplar, transmitting that control legacy to the Han Dynasty, and that Han Dynasty being a strong control period and also a strong political and expansionist period, has still having its impact nowadays, 20 centuries later. And 5 minutes about the famous legalists, and I will finish with the 4 books of the Confucian school. The legalists are known primarily by 2 major philosophers, okay? Shangyang, Shang, born in 390 BCE and died in 338. He was the advisor of the great-great-grandfather of the first emperor of China, Duke Xiao. And because he was the advisor of the first emperor ancestor, he was capable to transform the Qin principality into the most efficient and the most relentless principality of the Chinese world of the time, having its achievement with the creation of the first Chinese empire in 221 BCE. The other one is Li Si, Lisi. He was born in 280 BCE and he died in 208 BCE. And he was the advisor of the first emperor. Okay, so those 2 men play an immense role in the history of Chinese culture and the Chinese nation. But I would still want to name three others in that school of legalism. And the first one of those three is another Li Kui, L-I-K-U-I, Li Kui. He was born in 455 BCE and he died in 395 BCE. So I remind everyone that Confucius Confucius died in 495 BCE. Okay, so he was born a generation after Confucius. He wrote a book called Fa Jing, F-A-J-I-N-G, meaning the classic of the law, published in 407 BCE. And of course, the next legalist philosophers after him would develop some of his concepts, but he created, I would say, in that Fa Jing, published in 407 BCE, the core essential of the legalist tenets. Because once again, universal history, the dialectical struggle between the idea that we are born with the four spiritual seeds, and those spiritual seeds have to be developed into the four cardinal virtues through a classical education. And that is the best way to create the perfect or near perfect state, because that would be a land of aristocrats, okay, of the best in terms of morality and in terms of technical capacities, okay? Because aristocrats are not clumsy nerds. Aristocrats are people having a high moral development, but they are also skillful in technical stuff. And on the other side, you have the closed oligarchical endeavor. And that closed oligarchical endeavor will focus more on the fact that we can create a closed structure, but a relentless closed structure, a relentless, efficient closed structure. And we can put some hereditary leaders above that closed structure that will last forever. Okay, that is the fantasy of the closed oligarchy. Okay, that we will manage to find some techniques, some stuff, some structure that we would manipulate, and that we will exclude most of the people. And in that way, we will stay on the top forever. Okay, that's the oligarchical wet dream, if you want. Against the other, the timeless education with wanting to give the classical education to everyone, and that would be the best way to create the perfect or near perfect humanity. So that Fa Jing, precisely, Li Kui said, you have rewards and you have punishment. Okay. Once again, I said 20 minutes ago that the oligarchy always, the two handles, and Li Kui used the expression handles. Okay. The two handles of any oligarchy is rewards and punishment, or if you want, bread and circuses and punishment. Okay. So you would have to, and he wrote chapters on how to create storytelling, how to create psyops. Okay, even if he did not use the word psyops, of course, but it's conceptually it's the equivalent of psyops. Okay, how you would use spy inside the population, and etc. And the other one is okay. I said is Han Fei Zi, which is important. Han Fei Zi, it's written Hanfeizi, and he was born in 288 BCE and he died in 223 BCE. He was the classmate of Li Su. Okay, he was the classmate of the advisor of the first emperor of China. So that Han Feizi is famous for having written in his books that the moral excellence, the mental power, and the physical prowess of the leadership don't have any importance at all. Okay, they can be complete degenerate, imbecile, and ignorant as long as the framework is efficient. They will be capable to maintain their power. Uh, so I wanted to mention him because he is famous to push the legalist philosophy to its extreme, okay? Because it's very counterintuitive to say that the quality of the leadership doesn't have any importance. And I want to mention a last one because the legalist philosopher play a big role in the infrastructural dimension of ancient China is Simon Bao. Simon Bao, Ximenbao. Simon Bao was a hydraulic engineer, and he played a great role in the agricultural management of some principalities of his time. And he lived at the same time, more or less, than the Kui, who was born in 455 BC and who died in 395 BCE. I have plenty of things that I can talk about, and it's not excluded if that we can keep on after that. And last two things. At the time of Emperor Wu, there was two great legalists that I want you to know the name: Gongsun Hong, Gongsun Hong, Hong, born in 200 and died in 221 BCE, and Zhang Tong, Zhangtang. He died in 116 BCE. We don't know when he was born. So I think it's a good moment to have questions now, because I talked for, my God, it's the first time I think that in one of my presentation I talked for 100 minutes nonstop. But it's a good time, I think, to have questions, because in my experience, we can go deeper with the questions. Even if I don't have the time to present the rest, it's not important.
No, go on. This is fantastic mind food. Very, very much appreciated. And again, I can't restate this enough. I love how you're able to very much you've done the work, so this is a terrain you're very comfortable with. But the fact that you can guide people through this seemingly opposing coexistence of the worlds that are becoming and being very, very organically, because oftentimes people will just sort of look at the practical decisions that are made in temporal space and time, and all of a sudden leap to their own judgments of what the motives were, the invisible causal motives of individuals who make decisions, both in the present and in the past, and often miss the mark. And they won't see that there are ideals, whether those ideals are actually tuned to the timeless truth and beauty and goodness, or the simple appearance of these things, but they're very opposite. It requires a lot more mind work than people realize. But when you do that, things make sense a lot more, and you could appreciate. Again, you could just appreciate just how it is that that history has actually unfolded in truth, and how the future is also being determined by these same causal forces that were shaping the lives of people living in the Han Dynasty and before and after. We have a variety of questions that are people who want to pose a question to you. The first one who got in there was Stephen, who has as he describes it, a relatively complex question. So Stephen, go for it.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Quan, thank you for another fascinating, really fascinating lecture, which I enjoyed. I'm going to ask you to bear with me because I think I'm going to strain my ability to actually articulate the kind of question I have in mind. It starts with Matt's opening comment on the importance of being in harmony with universal law and so on and so forth. And I'm now going to jump to your observation that, as opposed to the West that projects forward in terms of utopia, the Chinese culture projects backwards, sort of in time, in that thought. And then I want to think about your golden triangle, or the axio-epistemological triangle. And I want to pull in a book from Dr. Joseph Farrell, in which he cites scholars who've noted a profound similarity between the structure of DNA and the ancient Chinese I Ching. And whether it's 64 hexagrams or 64 triplets of DNA, and so on and so forth. And I'm just going to read a couple of excerpts, if you can bear with me, because it's highly relevant to what you spoke about in some senses. But given the similarities between the I Ching and DNA, geneticist Gunther S. Stent wrote that the convergence between it and genetic code is nothing short of amazing. Indeed, it is so amazing that the chances of it being a statistical fluke are small. And he goes on and talks about the I Ching becoming a probability calculus with its own topology of sequence events and even a catalog of those events, implying a kind of universal consciousness of which each person is a component. And he goes on to kind of quasi-conclude, this is to say that the DNA of man interfaces directly with the physical medium or ether in a manner that no other DNA of any other species does. You know, almost like there's a coherence to the 0 point. Now I go back to your slide with the golden triangle. All true knowledge is a direct experience granted graciously by the supreme source of the supreme soul. And of course, in there, you also had the hexagram of the dual trigrams, which equates to the mathematics of DNA. So I guess my question is, you know, when you look at your overall lecture, and I guess this broader topic, and there's the Chinese philosophical unity of knowledge and so forth, it almost seems to me that when you take this additional topic, you could almost incorporate a degree of physics and human biology in there. So I wonder what your thoughts on this broader topic, and as a kind of a follow-on question, is there a school of Chinese thought that is thinking about these things and suspects that there may be a source of Chinese wisdom and knowledge in high antiquity that's lost to modern society, and that the ancient Chinese wisdom is actually a legacy of even greater forgotten tradition, which gets back to your thought on the rearward-looking Chinese perspective on perfection?
Stephen, I can always rely on you to ask the right question so I can expand on what I did not have the time to present in the last 100 minutes. Because your question would bring me to the silver pentagon, okay? Because the two concepts that I just let slide away because I wanted to start the question period is precisely the silver pentagon. And it goes back precisely in how, okay, there's a concept in Chinese philosophy which is called Gang Yin, okay? In the Pinyin system, it's G-A-N-Y-I-N-G, okay? Gang Yin, and it means the resonance between the human and the universe. And because okay, if I understand your question, the question is there an organic unity between the universe and the human heart and the human mind? That's the way I understand your question. Is it okay? So I understand your question like that. So I would answer like that.
Yeah, I say that's correct. Only in the more profound sense that there's actually a biological and physical resonance versus just a conceptual resonance.
Okay, because there's a Chinese philosophical project which goes in the sense of your question. Okay, and that project happens 1,000 years ago, and it's precisely my silver pentagon. Okay, and I would like to name the people in that project first before going into the theoretical answer of the Kanging, the resonance. Okay, there was a group of Chinese philosophers in the beginning of the 11th century during the Northern Song dynasty. Okay, and the name are Shao Yang, S-H-A-O, Yang, Y-A-N-G. He was born in 1011. He died in 1066. The other one that I want to mention is Sima Guang, S-I-M-A-G-U-A-N-G. He was born in 1019 and he died in 1086. The third one is Cheng Hao, C-H-E-N-G-H-A-O. He was born in 1032. He died in 1085. Cheng Yi was his brother, C-H-E-N-G-Y-I, and his brother was older by 1 year, yes, younger by 1 year. He was born in 1033 and he died in 1107. And the last two are Zhang, Zhang, he was born in 1028. He died in 1077. And the last one, Zhou Dunyi, Zhoudunyai, he was born in 1017 and he died in 1073. Why I bother you guys by naming them and giving their years of birth and of death? Because they are very important for Chinese civilization. Okay, why I call them the golden, the silver pentagon, is that Shao Yong, Sima Guan, Cheng Hao, Cheng Yi, Zhang Zai, and Zhao Dunyi, if you place them like that, they occupy the 5 corners of a pentagon. And at the center of the pentagon, I would put the name of a 7-1 who received the legacy of the 6 orders. Okay, and that one at the center of the silver pentagon is Chu Si. Okay, Zhuxi, and that Chu Si was born in 1130 and he died in 1200. And the idea, because the idea inspired me very much for the invention of my axial epistemological triangle, okay, the golden triangle. For them, you have the formless universe. They call the Wu Ji, W-U-J-I. I'm sorry because of all those concepts, but I have to name them because it's part of the answer. Okay, and that Wu Ji is formed because of the reality of beauty, goodness, and truth. Okay, and Larouche strangely said the same thing that those 6 guys 1,000 years ago. Okay, because if you remember in the book by Larouche called In Defense of Common Sense. Okay, in that book called In Defense of Common Sense by Larouche, there was a sentence which was efficient cause is substance and substance is efficient cause. Okay, and when I read that line from Larouche, I was absolutely flabbergasted because it's the modern expression by a Westerner of what those guys from the silver pentagon stated 1,000 years ago. Okay, and instead of using efficient cause is substance and substance is efficient cause, those guys would use 5 concepts. Okay, they would say Wu Ji, which is the absolute formless universe. Okay, before the creation of phenomenal reality, if you want. And in that absolute timeless universal universe before the creation of phenomenal reality, you have a timeless and eternal, the 3 absolute forms that in the West we call the Platonic forms, okay, of beauty, goodness, and truth. And those guys would call that 3 form, beauty, goodness, and truth, Tai Ji, okay? You know, I don't know if I have it here. Yes, I have it here. The Chinese symbol of this, okay? I think you guys all saw that Chinese symbol. Okay, the name of that stuff is Tai Ji, okay? Truth is the circle, okay? Goodness is what put the white fish and the black fish together. And beauty is the yin and the yang, okay? And I will come back to that. And you have the formless universe, Wu Ji. Tai Ji is the power of beauty, goodness, and truth. And then from that power of beauty, goodness, and truth, you would have the basic duality, yin and yang, okay? Electron and proton, male, female, night, day, etc. Okay, you can find a billion, trillions of opposites like that in phenomenal realities. And from that, you have the three beings in resonance. Okay, because let's not forget that the first concept is Gangying, okay, G-A-N-Y-A-N-G, the resonance, okay. So you have the formless universe, you have the three form of beauty, goodness, and truth. After that, you have the yin yang, and after that, you have the three beings in resonance. And those three beings in resonance in Chinese philosophy is called heaven, earth, and human beings. Okay, but heaven here you understood already, Stephen, is not the sky. Okay, heaven is the ultimate reality. Okay, heaven is the ontology. Okay, being, and earth is phenomenal reality. And the human being is precisely that being capable to go on the epistemological journey. And when I said that I was inspired by them when I invented my axial epistemopolitical triangle, is that we human beings are the only special kind of animals on earth capable to have the epistemological journey to connect the axiological dimension of truth, goodness, and beauty to the phenomenal dimension of the natural phenomena and of the political dimensions. And from that resonance, there wouldn't be the creation of 10,000 things, okay? Because let's not forget that the level of yin yang is the level of the natural creation. But the 10,000 things comes only after the resonance between heaven, earth, and human beings, because human beings in that representation, they have a role of creativity, of discovery, and of inventivity to expand, if you want, the first natural creation, let's say by God. Okay, since I'm speaking to Westerners, I would use the expression God, or the Chinese would say by heaven, okay, by the timeless universal dimension. So because of that deep resonance, it's not impossible that the structure of the I Ching might reflect the biology of the human being. But I would say that I take a liberty to jump to that conclusion, okay, because I was starting with broad general philosophical principle of resonance, of the fact that the human being is at the intersection of timeless reality and phenomenal reality. But if it's the case, why not? Why we should not find in the building block of a human being a reflection of that universal reality, which is expressed in a certain manner in the I Ching. But I would say that to give a yes answer to your question, we need much more research. But I gave you a first preliminary theoretical answer, in the sense that your question is not absurd, but it will take more research and deepening.
Thanks, Quan.
Quick question, Quan. We've got about 8 people on the list right now to ask you questions. Do you have that much time to go? Do you have a?
Oh yes, cool. I am absolutely delighted to make some propaganda for China. So just
okay, good. All right. So on that note, that sets the stage well for Doug. Go for it, Doug. Everyone is on mute.
First, I have to turn on my mic, right?
Yes.
I'm amazed every time I hear you talk. I'm amazed by how much I missed through all the specializations I had through the years. So thank you very much, Quan.
thank you.
The question, it relates to, it's much more prosaic than what you have here, and sure, probably more so than what's to come. In the forms of conflict that you talked about today, we currently have a conflict between President or Chairman Xi and the CCP. Is there a relationship, or can you find a relationship between the forms that you told us about earlier and what's going on today, please?
Oh, yes. I'm absolutely grateful for your question, Douglas, because yes, I would say that what the drama that is playing in Beijing now is almost a reenactment of what happened between Emperor Wu of Han between 141 BCE and 87 BCE, okay? President Xi is the supreme leader of China nowadays, so he would be the equivalent of Emperor Wu, I would say. And inside the CPC, you have factions who would be the equivalent of the plutocrats of Sang Hongyang, okay? Because to put things very simple, okay, and I hope that the true sinologists would not destroy me because I would simplify things very much, okay? I would say that President Xi represents, in my understanding, the Gongyang interpretation of the Chun Chu, okay? Meaning that he wants the state to be strong in order to give a classical education for as many Chinese people as possible. And one of his main advisor, the number 4 of the Politburo Standing Committee, which is Wang Huning, Wanghuning, that Wang Huning wrote in 1991 a book called America Against America, and that Stephen talked about me 2 weeks ago. Talked about that book to me 2 weeks ago. That book, written 30 years ago by Wang Huning, predicted what is happening now in America. Okay, I just want to mention that just to stress that the fact that the man is not an ordinary man. And that man is at the root of the restoration of the classical education of Confucianism that we see nowadays in China. So Wang Huning and Xi Jinping and the other 5 of the of the Politburo Standing Committee, they want to be part of the restoration of universal history in China, and China being a big piece in the planet that would be an influence in the rest of the world to come back to the classical education and to come back to the timeless journey of universal history, meaning peace and prosperity for all, okay? If we want to define universal history end goal in a simple manner. And the plutocratic dimension of that struggle is the Shanghai clique. And the Shanghai clique, the leader of the Shanghai clique is still alive, and he is the former president Jiang Zemin, okay? Jiang Zemen, Jiang Zemin. He was ruling China between 1989 and 2002. And during that period of the Chinese development, the Shanghai clique developed a lot of interactions and interconnections with the international finance and the financial dimension of the present day economy. Okay, I'm speaking of the global financial economy. And if you notice, at the last day of the Congress, former President Jiang Zemin was not at the long table, okay, of the 25 or 30 members of the Politburo. It was a sign for the Chinese people and the Chinese ruling class that it is not acceptable anymore for the plutocrats to run amok in China. And what happened to Jack Ma in 2020? It was a sign that the Chinese ruling class wouldn't be merciless to the plutocrats from now on in China. And the other major faction in China is the Chinese Youth League. And the Chinese Youth League, the leader of the Chinese Youth League is the former president Hu Jintao, okay? And I think that all of you saw the clips of a minute about the fact that President Hu Jintao has been escorted out of the hall. And it was a political move, okay? Because President Hu Jintao, former President Hu Jintao, expected that his protege, Chun Chu, would have been accepted inside the Politburo. And since he discovered at the last day that it's not the case, he was trying to provoke a scandal when the foreign journalists were introduced into the hall. And so that scene also, I think, has been a stage to send a clear message to the Chinese ruling class and to the Chinese people that China is going through a difficult period, and that absolute or almost absolute unity is needed inside China to overcome the headwinds ahead.
Mhm. That's good. That's good.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I would like to remind that Sang Hongyang, the plutocrat 25 centuries ago, no, not 25 centuries ago, 23 centuries ago, has been beheaded. So I would say that it's a good omen for us.
I've actually just taken a timestamp because I like what you just said so much, and I appreciate, Doug, your questions so much that I'm going to make this a standalone video, because I think a lot of people need to have this approach when they're thinking about what is it that is going on in China versus a lot of the oversimplified goop that we're given, which does not allow the appreciation for any of these dynamics to come to mind. So thank you. And actually, you know what, PD is technically the next question, but I'm going to just skip PD for the moment and come back to PD in a second, because Peter, your question, I think, follows up pretty organically from what was just said. So go for it, Peter, and then I'll go to PD.
Thank you, Matt. Good afternoon again. My question is a simple one. Does Xi Jinping's reference to, quote, small prosperity, unquote, relate to the second of the three phrases to which you referred at the commencement of the course?
Absolutely, absolutely. And the Chinese word for that is xiao kang, Xiao, xiao, small, kang, Kang, prosperity, small prosperity. That is the second stage of universal history according to the Gongyang interpretation of the Chun Chu. And the Chinese leadership nowadays is perfectly aware of their cultural legacy. So when they are speaking of Xiao Kang or of Da Tong, D-A-T-O-N-G, which is the achievement of universal history, okay, Da Tong is the next stage, meaning great harmony, okay? But I would say that to be realistic, we will have higher and higher Xiao Kang, of course. But Da Tong, it would be the day that all mankind would be brother, and that we will go to the space and to the universe, and that would be the end of history, the true end of history, and not the end of history in the sense of Francis Fukuyama, who is only a servant of the oligarchy, as all of you already know.
Good. Yeah, and that redefines the idea of the end of history into a new birth, of a sense, a new creation of a new start, which has its parallels deeply as well within Western philosophy too. That the end is not actually the end, but rather the beginning of the true story or of this chapter.
The true beginning, exactly. The true beginning when all of us would be in the image of God, if I want to use Christian terminology.
Right. Versus this opposing other oligarchical definition of the end of history being like this homogeneous entropy that just sets in where nothing really ever changes anymore in some abstract heat death or something like that.
Yeah.
Which is a very different spirit. PD, sorry to make you wait, but it's all.
Okay, thanks so much. Oh, this is truly wonderful. I'm so appreciative. It's really great. Could you just answer something really, really simple? You said Confucius was born in winter, and that winter is the time of history. And could you just say what the other seasons represent? And
Oh, yes.
Have you written any books?
No, I did not write any book, but it's not excluded that I would write some books on universal history in one day. About the seasons that are used symbolically to represent history in Chinese traditional culture, it's spring and autumn. And that is the meaning in English of Chun Chu, okay? Chun Chu means spring and autumn, and it's a poetic metaphor in Chinese traditional culture, meaning history. But when it's written with capitalized letters, it means universal history. And the version of the Chun Chu stressing on the idea of universal history of epistemological development is the Gongyang version that I call for short the Y version, because there's a Y in Gongyang. Gongyang, Gongyang, Gongyang version. Okay, and I want to remind again the Zuo version, the ZUO, from Mr. Zuo, is the geopolitical version. Okay, the version stressing on battles, on diplomacy, on manipulation of the mind, and the X version, the Guliang version, Guliang, is more on family hierarchies, on interactions with people, on social order. So it's very interesting because those three versions reflect the actual epistemopolitical triangle.
Right on. Kelly.
Oops.
I guess you can hear me now.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, hi Kelly. Hi.
Yeah, thanks for your explaining everything. You took pains to explain things a little more simpler for your audience, and I appreciate that. Yeah, my question, it's just if you can expand a little more like on the 4 seeds that you were talking about.
Oops, he seems to froze. Okay, Kelly, you froze for about 5 seconds, so I just understood that you want me to talk a little more on the 4 seeds, but I lost the first part.
Oh, I just wanted to thank you for being so patient with your audience and explaining things a little more simply than you usually do.
Is it a message?
Well, like, yeah, I've kind of followed you for a while, and yeah, basically I need a dictionary beside me when you're talking. Okay. But it's I do find it very interesting. Yeah, so if you can expand on yeah, the 4 seeds that you were talking about.
Yeah, thanks for the question, because the 4 seeds is truly at the center of my presentation.
Yeah.
And once again, the presentation is called the 4 seeds, timeless education and universal history. Okay, because the main idea is that because we have those 4 seeds, our main duty, maybe duty is not a nice word, our main endeavor, okay, because we have those 4 seeds at birth, the main human endeavor is to go through a timeless education, also called classical education, to have the capacities and the moral excellence to create universal history, okay, meaning peace and prosperity for all and forever. So the 4 seeds is an idea from the Rujia, from the school of the scholars, from at least 10, 20, 30 generations before Confucius. But it has been, at least we have the books from Mencius, which was born in 372 BCE, and he died in 289 BCE. Okay, so the first written form about the 4 seeds that we have is about 24 centuries ago. And it's from book 2b6. Okay, that's the specific paragraph from the Mencius, from which you find the theory on the 4 seeds. Okay, if you go to the internet, you have an excellent English translation by Professor Robert Eno.
I think I do have a copy of that.
Oh, excellent. So you already have that excellent copy. So you go to chapter 2b, which is in reality chapter 3, okay, because you have 3 ways to divide the Mencius, 1 to 14, or 1a, 1b, 2a, 2b. So 2b is chapter 4 in reality. So 2b section 6, and you will have the full development on the 4 seeds. But in the nutshell, okay, in a nutshell, as when we are born human, we have eyes, we have a nose, we have a mouth, we have 2 ears, etc. For the Rujia, for the school of the scholars, and I think for all classical school of the world, even if the words are not exactly the same, we are born with the capacity for commiseration, for shame, for respect, and for the other one, I don't know why it goes out of my mind, for commiseration, exactly. And when those forces are nurtured by the right classical education, commiseration becomes full-blown humanity, respect becomes valor and rituals, okay? But valor, once again, I insist on that, okay? Valor is not only behavioral with ourselves and with others, but also the courage and the respect to explore the inner universe and the outer universe. Okay, so it has a link with the scientific and technological development. And the metaphysical sense of shame would be transformed into justice, okay, because the true morality cannot be preached, okay? It's not by preaching people that the people will become moral, okay? It's by developing the seeds of metaphysical shame, because when if we observe ourselves deeply, we know that there are things that we are not capable to do because we feel those things to be so ugly that we are simply paralyzed when we want to do something ugly, okay? Because it's too ugly, we will not do that, okay? That is the true root of morality, okay? Because naturally at birth, we were endowed with that seeds of metaphysical shame, okay? That would stop us to do ugly things. And if a child is given a classical education that would expand his natural sense of metaphysical shame, he wouldn't develop a natural inner sense of justice, okay? So he would not do something unjust, unfair, okay? Because naturally, God or the universe grant him that metaphysical capacity not to do ugly things. And for the same, with the discernment between right and wrong, what rightly nurtured becomes wisdom. There's a psychological experiment which is very interesting, okay? Psychologists subjected children under the age of 4 or 5 to a situation of injustice, okay? And when those children are under 5, they would always react with anger and indignation because it's clear for them that it's unfair. Okay, but after 5 or after 6, because they have been influenced by adults, they would find justification, rationalization for the unfair situations. Okay, that is for me a direct experimental proof that there is something called the seed of metaphysical shame. Rightly nurtured, it will give birth to adults with a natural sense of justice, which is the best tool to protect us against tyranny.
Yeah, so it's not like teaching us right and wrong. It's we know that within ourselves.
Exactly. And I think the metaphor of a flower, of a plant is perfect, okay? If you take a rose plant, it is in the nature of the rose plant to produce rose flowers. So you don't have to extract the rose flowers from the rose plant. You just nurture the rose plants and the rose flowers will blossom naturally.
Excellent, thanks.
Good. Jerry, go for it.
Okay, hello.
Hello.
Oh, thank you, Quan. Oh, it's another beautiful class of yours. Just so educational. And I had a question which you kind of answered with Doug's question, but I wanted to ask it anyway. I got like about 5 pages of notes here I took, but right at the start, when you divided Chinese history into 4 periods, starting with the Longshan culture, going right up to the Republic period, after 1912. And I'm trying to put all of this class together, and I come up with this idea that when I look at China, Chinese culture and Chinese history, I get this idea of a dialogue, that China is this long dialogue that started, like you said, 30 generations before Confucius. So it's like a 3,000-year-old dialogue right up until today with President Xi and the meeting they just had. And I really like President Xi because he and I were born in the same year. So we're kind of like blood brothers. But my question was, if this is one long dialogue, where do you see the dialogue continuing in the future?
Yes. Well, and to answer you, I go back to the silver square. Okay, it would still be that universal dialogue between the people having inherited the legacy of the 5 classics and the 4 books, and those having inherited the legalist philosophers and the Huang Lao school. And I would say that that's why I call it the silver square, because it's the Chinese civilization case. But we can have a silver square with the American civilization, with the European civilization. It's always that. I like very much that you say dialogue rather than fight, because inside Chinese civilization, the legalist framework has been used by Confucian gentlemen. Okay, they have not been rejected completely when their efficiency and their capacity for good organization has been proven. Okay, because let's not forget that a lot of infrastructural work in the first Chinese empire, the second Chinese empire, meaning the Qin and the Han dynasty empires, have been supervised by legalist philosophers. Okay, and as long as the fake democratic man are used because they are capable to be organized and efficient. Okay, because after all, those are the fundamental qualities of fake democratic man. They are efficient and organized. But as long as you don't give to them the supreme power, it's okay. Okay, I would say that what is maybe original in this Chinese civilization is that the true philosopher inside Chinese civilization has always been clearly aware of that step, okay, that famous step between the fake democratic man and the true one, okay, the one thinking that mathematical forms is the supreme versus the one thinking that the mathematical forms are only servants, okay, only tools, and the rulers, the leaders, the thinkers have to be in the divine kingdom, which the first step is beauty, okay, which beauty characterizing the true democratic man, striving for true justice and not only the appearance of justice. And in that sense, I think that your choice of the word dialogue instead of fight shows that you understand the yin-yang thinking of the Chinese civilization, because nothing is absolutely bad. It's a question only, don't give to that person something that is above his capacity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess that point of differentiation that so few tend to make between the lower level and upper level Timocrat personality type would be that you can't, one type you can somewhat trust their judgment, like you could actually trust them on an important level, whereas the other type you might be able to perhaps use based on their technical proficiencies, but you couldn't really trust them with like their power of judgment, or will they make the right decision given a certain problem that they're confronted with. You can't trust that they will, whereas the other one, motivated more by a sense of conscience, you can, in that sense, right?
Exactly, because the sense of conscience precisely is granted by the access to beauty, goodness, and truth. And by definition, the fake democratic man doesn't have access to beauty, goodness, and truth.
Mm-hmm. Right. Dasha is like 15 hours into the future. It's probably super late at night or early in the morning. Dasha, you just threw out a question. Why don't you go ahead and just pose that?
Hello, everyone. I've got a question. What characterizes an appearance of justice? Well, what does that mean?
Okay, I will give an example that I gave during the last Wednesday reading session. You was there, but I will remind you my answer. Okay, when a accountant of the World Bank or of the IMF would go to a third world country and will give to the government of that third world country a very complicated plan with full of mathematical formulas justifying their demands. Okay, their demands is to cut subsidizations to education and healthcare most of the time, meaning the destruction of that country. That is their true goal. Okay, but they still want to justify, to give an appearance of justice to their demands. They're totally unreasonable demands. If someone has access to the forms of beauty and goodness and truth, and even to beauty is enough, that person will see through the fantasies of the plans offered by the IMF, okay? Because you don't ask a leader of a country to destroy his country by stopping the subsidizations to education or healthcare. But those people still need to give a cover, a veil to their absurd, unreasonable, and unhuman demands. So that's what they are characterized by the appearance of justice, okay? Because for someone not having access to beauty, they will excuse themselves by using that plan, those mathematical formulas, and to mesmerize people by those excuses. But those are not justice. Those are an appearance of justice, a justifications.
So it's basically the same thing where if, for example, an African country wants to take, well, it needs money, but IMF will only give them money under the condition that they suppress the development of energy. They do not, like, they basically only will give them money only if the government maintains the natural way of living, where they live in huts and they like don't even have water, they don't have plumbing. So basically IMF kind of like justifies this because of climate change or whatever. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
I think you understood everything. You gave the three more examples who are perfect, okay? In the sense that, that's the myth of the benighted savage, okay? The good savage, okay? You don't need technology, you don't need scientific development, you don't need epistemological journey, just live in the state of nature, you're perfect like that, okay? That's one of the classical excuses of the fake democratic man, okay? He used a mythology to cover his injustice.
Mm-hmm. Right.
My question literally keys off of that.
Perfect.
Okay. Hi, Kwan. Thanks for the great class. Good. It's definitely, I'm going to have to listen to it again just because to have the whole story in my head as one story, that was very thorough. Okay. Very, very much needed. Yeah, so it was what you were just saying, because I literally had in my head the word like the noble peasant, like wasn't that kind of thing thrown around? You said the benighted savage, or that's often associated with the cultural revolution stuff or whatnot. That's that was thrown around. Like I know weren't like Pierre Elliott Trudeau and a bunch of these people, they really like that cultural revolution stuff. And seems like the noble peasant thing was a thing that I even not if I'm not even sure if my question makes sense, but that's the kind of thing that we can imagine the Western oligarchy would kind of extol. And so, yeah, just maybe say, if you could say something about how the Western, the bad guys in the West try to pervert the more mystic, like the Eastern mysticism stuff, and how that, I feel like a lot of it has to do more with the like Indian mysticism, like that seems to be the bigger one if we're talking about Huxley or even like the Buddhist stuff. But even, yeah, just in general, and how what they play off of in the Chinese or Eastern mystical stuff, how that can be perverted, and how you would draw the contrast.
Yeah, thanks for your question, Dave, because that's something quite fundamental too. I would say that if we start with Aleister Crowley, I'm not sure his given name is Aleister, but Crowley, is a bit of a foundational guy, a bit with Bertrand Russell. Okay, but Bertrand Russell is maybe more the pseudo-scientific dimension, and Crowley was more the mystical religious dimension. And I would say that one of the tools used to corral the people is to create fake hierarchies, okay? Because those guys went to India or other places in Asia to get the psychobabble, okay, they need to create a fake oligarchy, okay, to create a fake hierarchy, okay, because hierarchy once again means hieros ake, the power of the sacred, okay. So they use some traditions from the East, some perverted traditions from the East, and they will create a fake hierarchy in order to attract people of talent, that they would mesmerize with the idea that they will be part of an elite, okay, of an inner circle, okay. If you take, for example, the book by Caron Quigley, The Anglo-American Establishment, Caron Quigley was writing about a plutocratic inner circle, okay. The people who are in the Cliveden set or the Round Table Society and things like that, they were perfectly aware they are part of a true plutocratic inner circle, okay? But I would say that true plutocratic inner circle wanted to create a fake pseudo-spiritual inner circle in order to attract the middle class of guys having talents to their service. That's my hypothesis, okay? And what is not, and there's no better tool than to create a kind of fake inner circle that would be so dazzling in the eyes of those middle class guys that they would attract them, a little bit like H.G. Wells. Okay, H.G. Wells was a guy from the middle class level, and he has been attracted to those plutocrats because he was dazzled by them, of course, and he used his talents for writing for their service. So my hypothesis that those kind of spiritual or pseudo-spiritual society have been created to attract middle-class people with talents to have a pool of servants for the oligarchy. I don't know, what do you think, Dave?
He's throwing the ball back.
I'm there. Yeah, I mean, I was gonna chime in. Yeah, I feel convinced that, not convinced, but I surmise the upper echelons of the oligarchy, I mean, they don't really believe much of anything, or in the sense that let's say they have an evil ideology. If they find that it's not actually efficient for maintaining their power, they're not going to keep believing it. So there's this really kind of power lust thing, which arguably psychologically, if we think about it in terms of pride and just power, when people find themselves in really these high positions where you just really seem untouchable, right? Les immortels. That really does something to the psyche, right? That's hard to imagine if we're not actually in it, especially if we're just born and bred in it from like the start. It's hard to just, it's hard for somebody who's not born into that to kind of play that out in their mind and put themselves in that position. And often they'll be like these outward, their own, and all the spectacle and stuff that's thrown in to give it the allure, and that will sort of mix people up or confuse them. So like, there's a lot of this conspiracy stuff, and I'm sure some of it's real, but about all the satanic ritualistic stuff, I'm sure there is some of that, but I almost surmise that within the upper echelons, I don't even know if they have, I don't want to say time for that. I'm sure they do all sorts of bad things, but it's like, it's a convenient, these mystery cults are a convenient way to manage the upper managerial classes and to keep all these people in cults and whatnot. But like the Freemasonic stuff, right, there's a discussion that the symbols mean something to a certain class of people who all think they kind of know what it means. But then there's the higher class that, understands there's a completely different meaning, and it's often, I think, more banal. And they have this in Scientology, from what I understand. Like there's a room you'll go in and there's like a final message, like a little paper. And I bet you it says something really stupid. It doesn't have a profound wisdom. If I were a betting man, I'd say there's not much wisdom contained there. It's probably some banal phrase that's kind of imbued with some kind of mystical thing. But again, if the oligarchy thought that their belief system was not conducive to maintaining their power, they'd eschew that. So it's not really that they believe. Yeah. So that was my reflection on, they create these cults and whatnot. And a lot of people, there's a lot of conspiracy stuff about all these cults because there are these cults, but I feel that's like a middle upper level. And on the upper level, I don't feel that they convince themselves too much of these things, but they're very useful. You have to give these people that lack an inner development, who are the corrupt, envious, power hungry types, you create these mystical, pseudo mystical systems that give them a sense of their superiority, while above there's something much more practical, a more practical evil that just will do whatever is useful. Was my thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is the tragedy, okay? Because if they have been given a true classical education, they would have been aware that they have a true superiority, that they have the 4 C's that they can develop. And if they want to be superior in the true sense of the word, they have been granted that superiority at birth. And if they truly wanted to work in that sense, they would have been truly superior, true aristocrats in the sense of Plato. And let's not that the old Plato described everything, because in the part of the chapter 7, the book 7 of the Republic, he described the fact that some young man would be attracted by the plutocrats to climb onto the platforms to play with the puppets in order to create shadows on the walls, okay? And that is a perfect image of that trap, okay? Rather than to develop their own true superiority who has been granted to them at birth, they go to a fake substitute.
Yeah, I Cynthia just shared a point. The Fall of the House of Usher is a very strong, interesting insight into the mindset of what one of these hereditary. If like you said, Dave, it is definitely hard to get into the mindset of somebody born into a culture so different from ours, into a structure of hereditary traditions, expectations, perverse practices, perverse ways of thinking about, or philosophies of teaching and governance, that you're expected to just become an appendage to in the course of your short life that you're given, right? And that you have to somehow participate in. that takes a lot of very unnatural forcing of the soul into that construct. But it's been refined over a long time. So there's a certain method to it. And because there's a method, it's something investigatable, as pathetic as it might be, despite its often access to power in a temporal sense. But Edgar Allan Poe's work, I find, is something extraordinary in terms of just getting into the deep psychology of both the logic and absurdity of this pathetic mode of being, of oligarchs. And again, that Fall of the House of Usher piece, that short story, is really mandatory reading, I think, for anybody who wants to at least get a taste of it without fully, I mean, obviously it could always be understood better. But there's definitely something strong there. So thank you, Cynthia, for sharing that. I put a little link in the chat box for anyone who wants to download the short story and read it. Kwan, you took us through a journey. This is really an amazing journey, and I really thank you for doing this. And as so many people have said and resaid, both in the comments as well as orally, that this is going to be one to rewatch, restudy again and again. There's a lot there, and I mean, for anybody who is curious if you've written a book or will write a book, know that I'm willing to start a big petition for a book by Kwan very soon. So yeah, definitely, please do get that ball rolling. I think these classes are definitely a good part of that process.
Yeah, it would be called a dialogue.
It would be called a dialogue. It would have to be a dialogue. That's right. It would have to be a dialogue. Dasha just squeezed in with one last question. So let's do that. So Dasha, since you've toughed it out more than anybody else and stayed awake till like probably 6 a.m., go ahead, ask your question.
Sorry if it's a basic question, but I really wonder why they want to stifle the growth in Africa or other less developed nations. Is it because the more people experience industrial development, the more reasons they have for further growth, whether it be epistemological or material, and that doesn't serve the oligarchs well? In it also keeping people at their primal state would demoralize them, which is what the elite also wants, especially if people can see how other nations are developing at a rapid rate. Or is there a simpler explanation for that they just want their resources?
Thank you for your question, because of course you gave the first layer answer. They want the resources, of course, but I think that the first part of your question is deeper. Okay, and I would like to remind an anecdote coming from the Roman Empire. The historical Tacitus, okay, I don't know if I pronounce his name correctly, Tacitus, Tacitus, who lived in the 1st century AD, was the son-in-law of a Roman general called Agricola, Agricola. And that Agricola was the Roman governor for Britain at the time, okay, 20 centuries ago. And one day, he was talking with the Tacitus about the island of Ireland, okay? And Agricola had the project to conquer Ireland, okay? And so Tacitus answered his father-in-law, but why, Your Excellency, would want to conquer those savages? They are not even fit to be slaves. And Agricola gave the answer that all oligarchs would give, okay? Even 20 centuries ago, or 20 centuries in the future, if they still exist, unhappily, we wouldn't see. Agricola said that to Tacitus, but my dear Tacitus, you don't understand. Even if they are not fit to be slaves, they wouldn't give hopes to the people around them that it's possible to be free. So we would have to crush them in order to show to those savages that the Roman power is at the top and there is no way to resist it. Okay, that is always the core motivation of the oligarchy. And what you said, that do they prevent the Africans to have development because they want to demoralize them and to demoralize other non-developed nation? Yes, that is the core answer. Okay, because once that you have access to the core of your soul, meaning to beauty, goodness, and truth, you are no more afraid of efforts, of being courageous, and even eventually to die if necessary. Okay, so always crush people at the level of their soul, and you don't need to do the small details. Okay, because to get the resources, of course, okay, but that is a small detail for me. The main resource of any nation is its people, and inside the people is the soul of the people, meaning having access by natural birthright to the four seats of commiseration, of respect, of discernment, and of metaphysical shame, which will be transformed into justice, humanity, courage, and wisdom. That is the true resource. And of course, that's why they don't want Africa to develop. And there is a practical consequence too. The African would probably be the most populous continent in one generation. Imagine all those people develop, industrialize, having access to a classical education. Geopolitically, it will change the face of the earth. Okay, and people interested to maintain a structure of domination, are not interested in such a revolutionary change in the geopolitical structure of the planet, of course.
That was perfect. That's exactly the way I wanted this to end. This is great. Dasha, perfect. Thank you. All right, and thank you, everybody. Thank you, Kwan, for taking this time on this Sunday. And next Sunday, we're going to look at yet another poet statesman of sorts who was able to walk in both worlds, timeless and material, and strike a moral balance with a real intention that has been underestimated and underappreciated over the past decades in the form of the poet Robert Frost. Jerry's going to go through an exploration into a dynamic and an aspect of Frost that most people have not realized existed, that I think would make him happy. So that'll be next Sunday at 2 p.m. This coming week for our reading group, it'll be not on Wednesday, but on Thursday at 8 p.m. For those who want to continue exploring the mind of Lyndon LaRouche and the economics at the end of a delusion, which has been a fun journey, but that'll continue, like I said, 8 p.m. Thursday this week. So thank you, everybody. And thank you, Kwan.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey, ciao.
Bye.